I never believed in the supernatural. I thought ghosts, goblins, and witches were just silly stories to scare children. That is, until I stumbled upon the dark secret of the vampire church. It started as a typical day. I was driving home from work, taking my usual route down a long, winding country road. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. I loved this time of day. The twilight hours always had a certain magic. As I reached the crest of a hill, I noticed an old, dilapidated church in the distance. Overgrown trees and bushes partially obscured it, but it was unmistakably there. I hadn't seen it before, despite driving this road nearly daily. Curious, I decided to take a closer look. I hesitated momentarily, unsure if I wanted to venture any further, but the curiosity was too intense. I reached out and pushed the gate open, wincing as it creaked loudly. Slowly, I made my way up the overgrown path towards the church's entrance. As I got nearer, I couldn't help but notice that the air seemed to grow colder, almost unnaturally so. When I reached the massive wooden doors, I paused again. A feeling of foreboding lingered, unshakable. But against my better judgment, I extended my arm and swung the doors open, stepping inside. Curiosity prevailed, and I cautiously descended the steps. The lower level was even more ominous than the sanctuary above. The ambiance was filled with an intense, almost tangible darkness. I could barely see a few feet before me, and the silence was deafening. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone and activated the flashlight. The feeble light barely banished shadows, but it was preferable to blind stumbling. I couldn't let go of the suspicion that I was being observed. I glanced nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see some horrifying apparition lurking in the darkness. Finally, I reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and turned the handle, pushing the door open. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The room, appearing to be the church's crypt, was vast and ample. Ornate coffins lined the walls, each adorned with intricate carvings and symbols. However, the truly terrifying part was yet to come. A group of people stood in the crypt's center, appearing human at first glance. But as I watched, transfixed with horror, they began to transform. Their eyes flickered with a malevolent gleam. Fangs extended from their mouths, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was witnessing a gathering of vampires. I wanted to scream, to turn and run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by sheer terror. The vampires sensed me, turned, eyes narrowing. One of them, a tall, slender woman with long, dark hair, stepped forward. She fixed me with an intense, predatory gaze, and I felt a chill run down my spine.
Well, what do we have here? A lamb lost in the wolf's den.
The other vampires started to converge upon me, their movements fluid and graceful. I could feel their hungry stares boring into me, and I knew I was in grave danger. Please, I stammered, my voice trembling. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll leave and you'll never see me again. She laughed harshly, devoid of any mirth.
Oh, I don't think so, my dear. You've seen too much, and we can't have any loose ends.
She took another step towards me, her eyes glinting with malice. I understood I had to act swiftly or I wouldn't survive this encounter. Summoning up every ounce of courage I could muster, I whirled around and bolted back down the hallway. I could hear the vampires hissing and snarling behind me, their footsteps pounding against the cold stone floor. As I sprinted up the stairs and re-entered the sanctuary, I desperately searched for anything to use as a weapon. I saw an old rusted sword on the wall, a relic from the church's past. Holding the sword, I swiftly turned as the vampire charged in. Without hesitation, I swung the blade, slicing through the creature's flesh with a sickening crunch. The vampire let out a shriek of pain and rage, collapsing to the floor. But more were quickly on my heels, their fangs bared and their eyes blazing with bloodlust. I fought with all my might, slashing and stabbing at the vampires as they swarmed around me. But they were faster and stronger than I imagined, and I knew I couldn't hold them off forever. A sudden flash of inspiration struck me as I was about to be overwhelmed. I quickly backed up towards the massive wooden doors, keeping the vampires at bay with the sword. When I reached the doors, I quickly pushed them open, rushing into the fading daylight. The vampires let out hisses of pain as the sunlight hit their skin, their flesh sizzling and burning. I didn't stop to watch their agonizing demise, however. I sprinted as far as my legs would carry me, creating a substantial gap between myself and the vampire church. It wasn't until I reached my car that I finally allowed myself to stop and catch my breath. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Leaning against the car, staring at the distant, crumbling church, I felt compelled to act. I couldn't just let this horrifying secret remain hidden. The world must see the truth about the vampire church. And so, I investigated. I spent countless hours scouring the internet, poring over old records and newspaper clippings, trying to piece together the history of this unholy place. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The vampire church, as it was known, had been operating in secret for centuries. It was a coven of vampires who had banded together, using the guise of a religious institution to lure in unsuspecting victims. Many people vanished without a trace over the years. The vampires seemed to be masters of manipulation and deception, their seductive charm luring in their prey like moths to a flame. The church was a labyrinth of hidden passages and secret chambers designed to keep their activities hidden from the outside world. And the crypt, where I had witnessed the vampires' twisted ritual, was the heart of their unholy domain. I uncovered even more disturbing details as I delved deeper into my research. The vampires were not just content with feeding on human blood, they were actively trying to expand their numbers, turning their victims into new coven members. And the symbols and carvings I had seen on the coffins in the crypt, they were part of a dark arcane ritual, a ceremony that would imbue the vampires with even greater power and immortality. The more I learned, the more I realized I was in significant peril. The vampires I knew would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And if they discovered that I had uncovered their true nature, they would come for me. I couldn't simply watch as evil spread. I had to do something, even if it meant risking my life. And so, I began to formulate a plan. Armed with knowledge and tools, I would return to the vampire church to stop them completely. It was a harrowing and dangerous mission, but I knew I had to try. Innocent lives were at stake, and I couldn't bear not trying. And so, one fateful night, I once again stood before the deteriorating doors of the vampire church, my heart thumping in my chest. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and pushed the doors open. The church's interior was just as eerie and foreboding as I remembered, the air thick with a palpable dread. I gripped the sword tightly, my eyes darting nervously as I descended the narrow corridor toward the crypt. As I reached the heavy wooden door, I paused momentarily, listening intently. I could hear the faint sound of chanting, a low guttural murmur that sent a chill down my spine. Inhaling deeply, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me was even more horrifying than I had imagined. The vampires were gathered around the coffins, their pale, gaunt faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight. They were engaged in some arcane ritual, their hands clasped together as they chanted in a language I didn't recognize. I watched, transfixed, as the vampires began to transform, their features shifting and distorting, their eyes aflame with a sinister gleam, and then, to my horror, they began to turn towards me, their predatory gazes locked on my trembling form.
So you've returned, I must say. I'm impressed by your bravery, or perhaps your foolishness.
The woman I had encountered before hissed, her voice dripping with menace. She approached me, her eyes narrowing.
Did you think you could come back here and stop us? You're nothing but a pathetic, insignificant human. Your meddling ends here.
With a flick of her wrist, she summoned the other vampires who began to close around me. I gripped the sword tighter, my knuckles turning white as I prepared to fight for my life. The battle that followed was a blur of flashing fangs and clashing steel. I fought with all my might, slashing and stabbing at the vampires as they crowded around me. But they were relentless, their attacks coming in waves, and I knew I couldn't hold out much longer. In the midst of being overwhelmed, sunlight suddenly streamed through a nearby window, catching the vampires off guard. They let out agonized screams as their flesh began to sizzle and burn, their bodies disintegrating into ash before my eyes. I took advantage of the distraction, rushing towards the exit, but as I reached the doorway, I heard a chilling voice behind me. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over," the woman hissed, her voice barely audible over the agonized cries of her fellow vampires. "We will not rest until you and everyone you love is destroyed." "You cannot escape us, human. We will hunt you down, and we will make you suffer." I didn't dare look back. I ran, trying to separate myself as far as I could from the vampire church. I didn't stop until I reached my car. Even then I felt unsafe. I anticipated the vampires' arrival and needed to halt their sinister intentions. The fate of the world, it seemed, rested on my shoulders. I started preparing, collecting tools and weapons to confront vampires directly. Despite the challenge, I was resolute in my determination. The battle with the vampire church had just started, and I wasn't prepared, but fear couldn't stop me. The horrifying memories of that night haunted my dreams and lingered in my waking thoughts. I became obsessed, driven by a singular purpose: to eradicate the vampire church and end their reign of terror. Days turned into weeks as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I armed myself with every tool and piece of knowledge I could gather. I read ancient texts on vampire lore, consulted with historians and occultists, and acquired weapons explicitly designed for combating the undead. Wooden stakes, holy water, garlic, silver blades. Every item I could think of was packed into a large, heavy duffel bag. I also took measures to protect my home. I lined my windows with garlic, sprinkled holy water at every entrance, and kept a crucifix within arm's reach at all times. I installed ultraviolet lights around my house to defend against vampires. Despite all my precautions, the nights were filled with an oppressive dread. I could feel their presence, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. Watching and waiting, the vampires lacked patience. One freezing and moonless night, I awoke to the sound of shattering glass. My heart leaped into my throat as I grabbed the silver blade from under my pillow. I crept through the darkened house, my senses on high alert. The ultraviolet lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Identified noise origin in living room. The large bay window had been shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor like deadly diamonds. A cold, unnatural wind blew through the broken window, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. And then, from the darkness, they emerged. 3 vampires, their eyes glowing with a predatory hunger, stepped through the broken window and into my home, their fangs gleaming in the dim light. The leader of the attack in the crypt, a tall and slender woman, was among them, her cold eyes locking onto mine. "You cannot hide from us, human," she hissed, sending chills down my spine. "This is the last time you defy us." Without hesitation, I lunged at the nearest vampire, driving the silver blade deep into its chest. The creature let out a guttural scream, its body convulsing as it disintegrated into a pile of ash. But the other 2 were on me instantly, their claws tearing at my flesh. I battled with all my strength. The holy water burned their skin, the garlic made them recoil, and the crucifix kept them at bay. But they were unstoppable, their power and velocity greatly exceeding my own. Outnumbered and outmatched, I had to find a way to survive the night. Desperate to save myself, I activated the ultraviolet lights, flooding the room with searing artificial sunlight. The vampires shrieked in agony, their skin blistering and burning under the intense light. I took advantage of their distraction, driving a wooden stake through the heart of the second vampire, reducing it to ash. Only the woman remained, her eyes blazing with fury. She charged at me, her claws extended, but I dodged her attack, grabbing a silver dagger from my duffel bag. With a primal scream, I plunged the dagger into her chest, twisting it until I felt her body go limp. She let out one final agonized hiss before collapsing to the floor, her body dissolving into a pile of ash. I stood there, panting and covered in blood, my heart racing as I stared at the remains of my enemies. The battle ended, but the war remained unwon. In the following days, I intensified my efforts to uncover more about the vampire church. I tracked down survivors of their attacks, gathering testimonies and piecing together a network of individuals who had encountered the vampires and lived to tell the tale. We formed a small but determined group, dedicated to eradicating the vampire church and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to their bloodlust. Sarah Anderson, also known as Sparrow, was a former police officer who was tough and resourceful. She had joined the force straight out of college, driven by a desire to protect and serve. But her career ended abruptly when she encountered a vampire during a routine patrol. The vampire attacked and killed her partner, leaving her scarred both physically and emotionally. Unable to convince her superiors of the truth, she left the force and dedicated her life to hunting the creatures that had shattered her world. Marcus Johnson, also known as Tank, was a former Marine. Marcus was the muscle of our group. His imposing stature and combat skills made him a formidable opponent. He had served multiple tours overseas, facing human enemies and the horrors of war. However, he was unprepared for the night vampires attacked his family. Marcus returned home to find his wife and children's bodies drained of blood. Consumed by grief and rage, he joined our cause with a single-minded determination to avenge his family. Elena Rodriguez, also known as Whisper, was our expert on the occult, with a comprehensive knowledge of vampire lore and ancient rituals. She grew up in a family of scholars. Her parents were historians who specialized in the supernatural. Elena's fascination with the occult turned into an obsession after her younger brother disappeared, leaving behind a trail that pointed to the vampire church. Her research led her to us, and her insights and intelligence became invaluable to our mission. David Williams, also known as Doc, a former emergency room doctor, David had seen his share of horrors, but nothing like the supernatural terror we faced. He joined us after treating a patient who had been attacked by vampires, a young woman who didn't survive her injuries. The haunting experience compelled him to go beyond mere treatment. David became our medic and strategist, using his medical skills to keep us alive and his analytical mind to plan our attacks. Jenny Clark, also known as Raven, is our group's youngest member, tech prodigy and hacker extraordinaire. She had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, finding solace in computers and technology. Her path crossed with ours when she hacked into the wrong system and uncovered evidence of the vampire church's existence. Her skills proved essential in gathering intelligence and keeping us one step ahead of our enemies. My name is Ethan Grayson, but I'm known as Shade within our circle. I never imagined that my life would turn dark and dangerous. Born and raised in a quiet town in the Midwest, I led an ordinary life. I worked as a graphic designer, spent time with friends, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of a calm, predictable existence. Together, we formed the Night Watch, a group bound by a common purpose and driven by our losses. Each of us had our reasons for fighting, but we shared a determination to stop the vampire church and protect the innocent. We practiced, engaged in combat, and experienced pain together, developing a connection that made us more formidable than the collective of our individual qualities. Our first target was a hidden safe house in an abandoned mansion's basement on the outskirts of town. Armed with everything we could carry, we moved in under the cover of darkness, determined to take the fight to the vampires on our terms. The safe house had thralls, humans seduced by vampires and transformed into servants. They were formidable opponents, but they were no match for our determination and the element of surprise. We dispatched them quickly, making our way deeper into the mansion. In the basement, vampires gathered around a makeshift altar, engaged in another dark ritual. We attacked without warning, our weapons striking true as we cut down the vampires individually. The fierce battle had one purpose: to eliminate this ancient evil. As the last vampire fell, a feeling of dark contentment washed over me. Our battle against the vampire church was ongoing despite the significant blow we had struck. More hid in shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But we would be ready. Our strength and determination united to end the vampire church. The battle was not just mine anymore, it was ours. Together, we would see it through. As we stood in the basement, surrounded by the ashes of our enemies, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The vampires had underestimated us, but they wouldn't repeat that mistake. We would continue to fight, to hunt them down, and to bring an end to their reign of terror. The battle against the vampire church had just started, but we were prepared. We won't stop until all of them are destroyed. The weeks that followed our successful raid on the vampire safe house were a blur of activity. Our small group, now calling ourselves the Night Watch, grew in numbers as we recruited more survivors and vampire hunters. We trained rigorously, honing our skills and preparing for the next strike. The vampires would not rest, and neither could we. Through our network of informants and allies, we learned of another vampire nest in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of a nearby city. The factory, with rusted towers and broken windows, was a blight on the landscape, a testament to neglect, ideal hideout for vampires thriving in shadows and decay. We planned our assault meticulously, knowing that the element of surprise was crucial. Our group of 10 assembled at the edge of the factory grounds under cover of night, our weapons ready and our nerves steeled for the battle ahead. The air was thick with tension as we crept towards the entrance, every shadow a potential threat. As we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The vampires were cunning and ruthless and would not take our previous victory lightly, but we had no choice. We had to press on. We entered the factory through a side door, slipping into the darkness like ghosts. The interior was a labyrinth of rusting machinery and crumbling walls, the perfect setting for an ambush. We moved cautiously, our flashlights casting eerie beams of light that danced across the walls. It wasn't long before we encountered our first vampire. It lunged at us from the shadows, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. We reacted instantly, our weapons flashing in the dim light. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream as it was struck down, collapsing to the floor in a pile of ash. But the scream had alerted the others. Vampires emerged from every corner of the factory, their eyes burning with fury. The air was filled with snarling and hissing as they closed on us. We formed a tight circle, our backs to each other, and prepared to fight for our lives. The battle that ensued was brutal and chaotic. The vampires, faster and stronger than any previous encounter, moved with a blur of claws and fangs. We fought with everything we had, our weapons flashing and slicing through the darkness. But the vampires were unyielding, their attacks coming in waves. Just when it seemed that we would be overwhelmed, I spotted a figure standing on a balcony above us. It was the slim, elegant woman who had led the attack on my home. Her eyes were locked onto mine, and I could see a cold, calculating hatred in their depths. With a shout, I broke from the circle and charged towards the stairs, my heart pounding. The vampires tried to block my path, but I fought through them, my blade cutting a path through their ranks. I reached the balcony, my breath ragged and my muscles burning. The woman watched me with a cruel smile, her fangs glinting in the dim light.
You've come a long way, human, but this is where your journey ends,
she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She attacked me, her claws extended, but I was ready. I dodged her attack, driving my silver dagger into her side. Despite her hiss of pain, her rage only grew stronger. She struck back with terrifying speed, her claws raking across my arm and drawing blood. We fought fiercely, our movements a deadly dance of steel and shadows. The woman was a formidable opponent, her force and velocity far outmatching my own. But I had something she did not, a burning determination to end this nightmare. With a final, desperate surge of strength, I drove the dagger into her heart, turning it until I noticed her body become motionless. She let out one final tormented scream before crumbling into a mound of ashes at my feet. The battle below had begun to turn in our favor. With their leader gone, the vampires' morale seemed to crumble. My companions fought with renewed vigor, cutting down the remaining vampires individually. The factory echoed with the sounds of battle, the air thick with the scent of blood and ash. Finally, as the last vampire fell, a heavy silence settled over the factory. We were bruised and bloodied, but we were alive. We had struck another significant blow against the vampire church and survived to fight another day. As we stood amidst the wreckage, I felt a glimmer of hope. The vampires were powerful and ruthless, but they were not invincible. We had proven that we could fight back, that we could win. However, I knew the war was not yet finished. The vampire church, vast and ancient, had battles yet to come. However, we would be prepared. With determination, we saw this through to the end. We gathered our fallen comrades and left the factory, our spirits weary but unbroken. Despite the dark, cold night, a strong bond united us, forged in battle. As we returned to our safe house, I couldn't help but think of the lives we had saved and the lives we had avenged. Underestimating us, the vampires faced relentless destruction. The fight against the vampire church had just started, but we were fully prepared. Until their reign of terror is a distant memory, we will persist. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and share your scary encounters. Also, consider joining the Fear Frequencies community for exclusive perks and early access to new content. Your support helps us create even more thrilling stories. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider leaving a super thanks.